Okay, Amnon, this is Drew. Do you want to go ahead and get us started?
Hello, everyone. With polite 2 minutes late, we welcome you all to our webinar today. It's called Some Fallacies of Innovation, Chapter 1, Why Brainstorming Does Not Work. And as you can see from the title, we hope that this will be the first in a series of fallacies of innovation, and we're going to dedicate this specific one to brainstorming. Drew?
Yes. Okay, thanks, Amnon. So before we get started, if you're seeing this screen, that's a good sign, and you should be hearing us too right now. If you can't hear us well through your computer, I'd like to point out that there is also an option to listen by telephone. As you can see on your dashboard, you can select the option of telephone, and then you just follow the instructions from there. If you have any additional problems or technical issues, please call us at international 972-3763-0601. Now, also note that all of the participants are muted. We have and expect a large number of attendees today in a fairly limited amount of time, so we're not going to be able to conduct a conversation or switch control of the mic. But we do encourage you to take advantage of the questions window pane right here. We'll try to address as many of them as we can, either speaking or in writing. We'll stay on for a while at the end of the webinar, and of course we're happy to correspond with you by email. We'll be giving you our email addresses at the very end. So we hope that's all clear. Let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So here are your presenters. This is Drew Boyd. You see me there on the left, and let me introduce my colleague and friend Amnon Levav. He is there on the right. He is the co-founder and managing director of Kinetic Inventive Thinking, innovation consulting based in Tel Aviv. And I've known Amnon for about 12 years now. I got to know him while I was at Johnson & Johnson. I was actually a client of Amnon's, and he and I have worked on many, many innovation projects, both within Johnson & Johnson as well as other companies. And I've learned a tremendous amount about innovation from Amnon. So Amnon, it's nice to be with you today from here in Cincinnati, and you're in Tel Aviv.
And I'd like to introduce my good friend Drew Boyd. And officially, I was hired to teach him while he was in Johnson & Johnson about innovation, but quite a substantial part of what I know about innovation and what we know in SIT comes from our interaction with Drew. Many, many years of experience in corporate America. As I told him, since I met Drew, I can't speak badly about corporate America, like maybe I used to sometimes before. And his experience is very corporate on one hand, but very open to methods, to innovation, and to everything that's going outside, happening outside of the corporate world. And today he's a professor teaching in the University of Cincinnati. He's a speaker about innovation, about persuasion, about marketing. And let's go.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. So, well, that's our official bio and introduction. But honestly, take a look at this. This is what we consider our real story, what you're never going to see on one of our official bios. And I have to admit that I've spent a lot of money while at Johnson & Johnson on a lot of different innovation consultants in my time. I've tested a lot of methods. My colleagues and I at J&J feel like we've tested just about everything that's out there. And honestly, we've been burned a lot. We've failed on many occasions with these methods, and honestly, it's left a lot of scar tissue, and this is a big driver of what we want to share with you today. What we've seen work and what we've seen doesn't work, and what are some of the inherent issues that we want to take you through today.
And my real story and it also exposes Drew a little bit, is that I've been complaining about brainstorming in the past 18 years since we started doing what we do, but always felt it was kind of impolite to say what I think of brainstorming. And through Drew's work on his book that was published in June, which is called Inside the Box, and it's obviously not a brainstorming book, through our discussions, more and more I understood that actually it doesn't make sense to be quiet about what I think I learned and we all learned about brainstorming in these years. And the combination of our experience and Drew's research culminated in this webinar, in that we think it's a useful service to society that will say what we've learned about brainstorming and what brainstorming does, and mainly what it doesn't do for you.
Thanks, Amnon. So we hope this webinar will be useful for you in a few situations. First of all, you may be using brainstorming now and you have concerns about how effective it is.
And second is, if you've never used brainstorming and you may be considering the option to start doing so, maybe because someone's recommended it to you, or maybe because it just seems like the only thing you can do if you want to innovate.
Or finally, you don't use brainstorming and don't want to, but you need some good arguments within your company to stop its use. And I've seen this time after time where people in large organizations are frustrated with the use of this tool but lack the evidence to move the organization in a different direction. So I think you'll get a lot of value out of this webinar if you're in that situation.
So we've got people registered from 30 countries of these years and 5 continents, and these people, you people, if you'll bear with us for these 50 minutes more or less, what we think you can gain is, 1, we'll talk about what's been learned in 50 years of academic research about brainstorming. Our conclusion, you won't be surprised to hear, is that it doesn't work, or at least it doesn't work for what it's supposed to work. Then we'll talk a little bit, try to understand why it doesn't work. Then we'll reflect on a curious theme that if it doesn't work, if we're right about how not useful it is, then why is it so ubiquitous? Why is it so universal? And why did so many people use it? And then we're going to talk about the fact that we believe that it not only is not useful, but it actually is damaging in the context of innovation, and we'll try to explain why. And in the end, we'll try to help you consider, if you agree with at least some of what we're saying, what it means in terms of going forward.
Thanks, Amnon. Now, I think it's fair to say that we know this is somewhat of a controversial topic. And what I have experienced is that many times the debate between two people about brainstorming is simply because they lack a shared understanding of what we mean by brainstorming. The word brainstorming has taken on a variety of popular meanings over the years. For some, it simply means getting together and having a casual discussion to come up with a few ideas. Some others believe that the term brainstorming is the same as idea generation. So what we hope to do is address the core element of what brainstorming is, taking you back in time to understand the history of it and what it means when we say classic traditional brainstorming and the way its inventor created it. Brainstorming dates back to the 1930s. It was developed by a man named Alex Osborne. Osborne was an advertising executive with the legendary firm called BBDO. He was the O in that BBDO. And Osborne was frustrated with people's inability to come up with ideas, and he had a very clever way to address it. He formed groups of people who would, and this is a direct quote, they would use their brain to storm a problem. And of course, being the clever advertising man that he was, he realized it needed a clever name, and he coined the term brainstorming. Now, you all probably know brainstorming by its classic rules. Let me tell you a little bit about brainstorming and the way Osborne defined it. Next slide, please. And what you see here is a copy of Osborne's book. He conceived this in the late 30s, perfected it in the 40s, and finally published the book that you see here in 1953. And this is actually my copy of that book. It took me quite a while to find it. I'm holding it in my hand as we speak. I actually found it from an antique book dealer, and I've read it cover to cover. And I think it's important as an innovation professional. If you see yourself as committed to innovation and creativity, I think I would encourage you to do what I did, is to go back and read the classics like this book and others to understand what is the research that underpins what we know about creativity and innovation. So on the next slide, you're going to see right out of Osborne's books his 4 rules of brainstorming. And you may know these rules by different terms, but this is truly out of his mouth how he envisioned it. Judicial judgment of ideas is ruled out. What Osborne believed is that you had to separate the judgment of the idea from the generation of the idea, and that way people would feel more free to share their ideas in an open group forum. Free willing is welcome, quantity is wanted, combination and improvement are sought. Now over the years, these rules have taken on sort of different definitions, like the first rule, judicial judgment of ideas is ruled out. You may hear that as defer judgment or no bad ideas. We thought it was important for you to see it exactly the way Osborne originally conceived this tool. Now, brainstorming was immediately popular. It spread the globe like wildfire. People jumped on the brainstorming bandwagon. It was like a gift from God. In fact, major corporations would hold press conferences announcing their adoption of the brainstorming technique. I mean, it must have been quite exciting times back in the 40s and 50s. The academic community jumped on this bandwagon too, and they began to study brainstorming to understand its effectiveness. They wanted to see brainstorming in a laboratory, clinical setting to optimize brainstorming. What would improve it in terms of the optimal group size or the optimal amount of time? The first of these was a man named Taylor, and he and his colleagues at Yale did the first study on brainstorming in 1958. Now, to create a fair trial, they created a control group, and here's how it would work. They would take a group of brainstormers, say 8 people, and they would compare them to 8 individuals working on the same task, but working individually. And then the comparison would be made between the brainstorming group, and then the 8 individuals' output would be aggregated and compared. So it seems like a pretty fair trial of the technique. How does it compare to individuals? On the very first trial that Taylor conducted, the control group outperformed the brainstorming group. They produced 80% more ideas and better ideas. Now, that's a staggering notion when you think how popular brainstorming is today, but on the very first trial, it proved that brainstorming doesn't work. And this set off a huge controversy and caused other people to rush in and study brainstorming as well. And what happened? Study after study confirmed Taylor's findings that brainstorming as an ideation technique, as a tool for creativity, is not effective. We're going to talk about some of those known reasons why, as well as some of the reasons we've seen in practice. And I think the best summary of this is what you see here on the slide. It's a paper published last May by Dr. Gary Shear. It was published in the Journal of Product Innovation Management. And Gary was quite clear. His conclusion is simply this: 50 years of research shows brainstorming does not simply kill ideas, but disproportionately eliminates better ideas and the very best ideas. And I encourage you to get this paper and read his very thoughtful analysis of the years of research on this and some of his conclusions about why it continues today. Now, we are going to look at some of these flaws and specifically how they apply to you in a corporate or organizational setting. And I'm going to turn it over to Amnon, who's going to walk you through some of these important insights. This is a chance for you to really understand and compare it to your own experience with brainstorming and in an organizational setting. Amnon?
Thanks, Drew. I think that an important point mentioned by Drew right now is that we believe that what we are talking about should resonate with your experience, and we encourage you to compare what we are talking about with your personal experiences of brainstorming. And when we start talking about the flaws of brainstorming, to try to explain this surprising conclusion of the research, or at least surprising for many people, we find that there are basically two types of flaws and problems with brainstorming. One has to do with the fact that brainstorming sessions are, by definition, conducted in a group setting. And we'll see that research, as well as one's experience, show that the group setting is a problematic setting in many ways. And the second is due to specific rules and characteristics of brainstorming that separate it from just sitting around in a group and doing other kinds of activities. So let's look first at the flaws that have to do with the fact that brainstorming is conducted in group setting. And here, first of all, is what research calls productivity loss. Productivity loss, two of the most famous aspects of productivity loss. One is free riding. You have a session of brainstorming with 14 people. 3 of them are checking mails, 2 of them are thinking about other things, and 3, 4, 5, depending on the case, are talking and are really engaged. The second is distraction. Since you're in a group session, a large part of the time you have to listen to what others are saying. You can't pursue your own thoughts. What others are saying starts igniting all kinds of associations in your mind that have nothing to do with what's going on. The interactions between people take over. Normally the social interactions override the focus of the subject of the discussion. So there's a huge productivity loss just by the fact that there's a group trying to work together, and most people find it more difficult to concentrate on thinking when they're in a group setting. Within the group setting, there's another aspect, which is the psychological and sociological inhibitors. And again, I don't think this is great news, but I think it's worthwhile thinking about it. There's fear of assessment. Imagine instead of having only your own criticism to deal with, you have to speak in front of 10, 12, 15 other people and ask yourselves what they will think of what you're saying. On the other hand, there's consensus speaking, and we know this phenomenon from life, and it's very well documented in research that when you put people in a group, they tend to seek consensus. So remember that we're in the brainstorming from the outset because we're trying to create ideas that are different, but we put people in a setting where there's a pool of the group to think the same. So we're actually canceling out the reason why we're there in the first place. And also, another aspect is competition. You put people together, they start comparing themselves to each other, they start trying to compete, instead of working together, their energies tend to cancel out each other because they may be competing. Now, all of these group factors can be mitigated. With the right structured approach, you can work a group and try to mitigate. You can't make all these factors disappear, but you can mitigate it. But does brainstorming really do the job of mitigating? Actually, it doesn't. What brainstorming does, it creates an illusion of that the psychological and sociological inhibitors are resolved. But actually, and here we are already talking about specific flaws of brainstorming rather than just the problematics of a group of people trying to innovate together. And one of the great flaws of brainstorming is that by creating this illusion, it kind of brings people to a situation where they don't put the problems on the table. So people are there assessing each other, people are there afraid of each other's assessment, but supposedly they're in a safe space, so nobody's dealing with the issue. So instead, everyone's playing out kind of step acting. It's actually a farce that people consciously or unconsciously are engaged in, and instead of confronting the dynamics and the problematics of the group, they're all pretending that they're all working together towards a common cause, which consciously they may be trying to do, but in fact the energies, the mental energies are canceling themselves out. Now, one of the main points here is the rule that Drew mentioned that has many names, but we can call it the no judgment rule. Now, the problem with the no judgment rule is, first of all, that a no judgment atmosphere does not exist. People cannot stop judging because judging is part and parcel of what it means to think about things. So, first of all, again, there's an illusion of no judgment when judgment definitely does exist. And second, if you think about it, if it were possible to switch off the judgment switch in one's mind, it wouldn't make sense to do so. Judgment is such an integral part of what perception is about. Imagine our ancestors in the woods looking at a lion and seeing just that there's a big yellow creature there and not judging that it wants to eat one. It's not a useful way of perceiving the world. So no judgment doesn't exist and doesn't make sense. Of course, it does make sense to structure judgment, but that's another thing altogether from saying there's no judgment. And another important rule, and the last one I'm going to refer to here, is that quantity supposedly leads to quality. But as we know in life, quantity does not necessarily lead to quality. You can have a list of 150 bad ideas, and 200 bad ideas is not more than 150 bad ideas. So, as we all know, 2 or 3 good ideas as a result are better than 100 not so good ideas. And brainstorming does not supply any mechanism to convert the 100 mediocre or bad ideas into 3 good ideas. This creates, again, the illusion that if we have enough ideas, some of them must be good. But why must they be good is not clear. Specifically, I want to refer to a phenomenon that we see often in our work in brainstorming, in groups, sorry, that let's say you're trying to create a situation where there's no judgment. So when people tell us about it afterwards, then let's say you've got 12 people, professionals in a company that makes some product, and someone came up with a thought. And this thought is considered an idea, and everyone likes this idea very much, except for Joe, who's in charge of some machinery in the assembly line, and he knows that this idea will not work for some reason that he professionally knows about, definitely. But he can't mention it because he's trying to be not judgmental. So the idea passes on, and it even gets many red stickers because most of the people who are not Joe don't know that this idea won't fly. But the next idea, many people like, and Joe likes it as well because he's not Wendy, who's there from sales, and she knows that the purchasing in Target or in Walmart will never buy this because it doesn't stack on the shelf. So everyone puts their red stickers except Wendy, who knows that this idea won't work out. So you end up having many ideas with many red or green stickers. People actually love them. But for each idea, there's at least one professional who knows that it won't work. He or she didn't get a chance to raise their objection. So the only thing they can do if they want to be responsible is when this idea comes to their desk for implementation, they will kill it. And so you see that 6 months after the session, or let's say 6 hours after the session, everyone is happy and energized. 6 months after the session, when you check how many ideas have been implemented, you find that none have been implemented. And I'll pass it to Drew because Drew drew my attention to some elements of brainstorming as they refer to people in the organization.
Okay,
Drew,
thanks.
please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you know, it's interesting that as I look back at my career, where I have facilitated many brainstorming sessions. I'm a trained facilitator. I've participated in many sessions as well. And looking back now, I can see a dynamic that I'm finally able to explain. We call it the team selection bias that brainstorming causes. And let me explain what happens. This is what I've noticed. Somebody gets invited to a brainstorming session, and they're all of a sudden the experts, the people that you really need in the room, for some reason they're just not able to attend. They opt out. Something has come up. They have to travel, or they have a meeting with their boss, or some other reason they're able to weasel out of the out of the brainstorming sessions. And for the corporate practitioners out of there, you know as well as I do that you get very good at managing your schedule and knowing how to dodge any type of activity that you don't want involved in. And so you end up a brainstorming session without the very people that you need, but then the people who are not experts, or say the younger members of the team, they want to be part of the brainstorming sessions because it gives them a chance to learn, to be visible, to show their worth and how smart they are. And they get to meet people, they get off site, they have a good time. And so you find you have a sort of a polarity here of people who aren't there that need to be there, that are there that really aren't the critical ones. You get a few participants who get involved, but maybe they only come in for a few parts of the session. They kind of keep their distance because they don't want to be associated with anything that is perceived to have been a failure. And I think this organizational dynamic, not studied in the literature, I'm not saying this is rooted in any of the research that's been done before, but it is certainly an observation that I have seen in my company, my former company, and other companies as well. And you ought to be aware of it too, because it's a dynamic that defeats the purpose of what you're trying to do. So let's go to the next slide and talk about this issue. Why is brainstorming used so universally? And we're talking about a 60-year-old tool now that has some enormous amount of laboratory research against it. And when I, as a corporate practitioner, found this data, I was stunned. I thought, my God, why do companies continue to use it if all this data is there? And I think one of the simple reasons is that the data was largely collected and done by the psychology community and just hasn't made its way over to the business community. But there are some documented reasons as well. For example, according to the data, brainstorming is fun. The people in the brainstorming group rated it as more satisfying, while as the individuals working alone didn't find it as satisfying. And it is fun. Brainstorming as a team building tool, which is an important reason why it continues, certainly may have some value. But the other reason is that I think people think brainstorming is inexpensive. After all, you can just get a few people together informally, start brainstorming, perhaps have a facilitator. But when you think about the opportunity cost and the time you're spending where you could be spending it on other methods or other higher value ways, the opportunity cost is high. Brainstorming is not cheap. In fact, it's very, very costly. And I think a third reason is just simply this. Brainstorming is entrenched in our society. It's a term that has become the universal term associated with any attempt to create an idea. And I don't think you'll ever see the term brainstorming leave our vocabulary anytime soon. But it's important then for you to separate what truly is brainstorming in the way Osborne conceived it and the variations of it over the years that have emerged versus just the term being used for simple ideation, coming up with an idea. It's not going to go away anytime soon, but you need to know the difference.
And actually, Drew, I didn't have time to tell you, and it sounds too good to be true, but this morning I had a meeting with a VP of a large organization here in Israel of thousands of people, a VP HR, Human Resources, who's launching an innovation program, and we had a 1 hour long conversation. Very smart, intelligent guy with a very well studied, knows literature and knows a lot. And we talked for about an hour about our point of view about innovation, etc., in terms of organizational terms, not individual terms or team terms. And then at the very end, he said, so how do you guys teach brainstorming? So I said, we don't teach brainstorming. And he was taken aback because, and then we talked for about 2 minutes, and I realized that for him, innovation or creativity equals brainstorming, and brainstorming equals creativity. The concept that I could be talking about creativity and not referring to brainstorming was not there, was just not there because the paradigm is so well entrenched. On the other hand, we have to give credit where credit is due. And I think we discussed with you a kind of historical, sociological explanation of why brainstorming is so successful, although it's really useless for what it was invented for. And I think that what happened was that brainstorming did play a very important role historically in the corporate world and even in society. Because if you think about late 30s and 40s, as you mentioned before, corporate society, you just need to think of Mad Men and like rewind it even 15, 20 years back, very hierarchical, very closed. The liberty that people had to talk, to say their mind, to argue with their bosses was very, very limited. And suddenly came this liberating phenomenon that you could sit around the table and you were actually allowed to say whatever came into your mind, and nobody was allowed to say that it was nonsense, and nobody was allowed to fire you. And so actually, brainstorming did an amazing thing, and I think we should all be grateful to it. Because the fact that today in many societies and in most corporate arenas, people are allowed more or less to say what they think is very largely in large part due to brainstorming. So brainstorming broke barriers, and it did a huge job breaking barriers. And that's why there are so many people in the world that feel grateful to brainstorming, and they think that that's the solution to coming up with new ideas. And actually, brainstorming is a good solution to help people mention ideas that they had thought about before. But this social chain-breaking, liberating role was important in the 40s and the 50s, maybe also in the 60s, 70s, etc. But today, it's still a necessary condition for ideas to flow. But it's very, very far from being a sufficient condition. So we say that brainstorming, thank you very much, but it has outlived its usefulness. We live with the result of brainstorming, but we don't need it anymore, at least not in the context of generating new and useful ideas.
All right, Amnon, thank you very much. Now, if you look at this slide here, let me explain what this shows. Many people will tell you that they have improved brainstorming, that they've changed it, and they've morphed it into a different technique where they take the essence of brainstorming and add maybe different facilitation techniques or different variations of tools that make it more effective and overcome some of these problems. And while I was at Johnson & Johnson, I tried many of those, most of those, if not all of them, to see if that was true. And honestly, I was disappointed. This didn't get the results that we were looking for. And I found this research published last year by Dr. Kevin Byron. He's in the United Kingdom. He's an engineer and does research. And what Kevin did is address that issue about these modifications to brainstorming. And I took this graph right out of his paper. And what it does is it compares the nominal group, again, a control group of individuals on the left, to the brainstorming group on the right. The height of the bar indicates the number and quality of ideas. And what Kevin discovered is that even with these modifications, that brainstorming still fell short of what a group of individuals could do on their own. And I think this is an important point to make, is that you're going to encounter variations of brainstorming that are essentially brainstorming-like. They have the essence of brainstorming in it, and this is what you want to be sensitized to and understand sort of what is that essential engine inside, and is it really getting you the productivity and the output you need for your organization.
So Drew mentioned the family of variations of brainstorming, and we collected here just a few names out of many, many that exist out there. If you notice, in many of these names, the word brain or storming or the sound exists because people are using it for the benefit as kind of a marketing tool to market different methods. But there are many methods that don't appear externally to be brainstorming, but when you look at them a bit closer, you see that the actual idea generation element in them is basically brainstorming. And here I want to mention two things. First of all, many of you probably, either in your companies or in other companies, have encountered thick books or large diagrams that describe an innovation process. And very often this innovation process is pretty sophisticated and well built and intelligently built and even effective. But very often there's a box in these flow charts, and the box talks about ideas that need to fill into this machine, or feed into this machine, so it will come out with innovation. And when you look at that box says ideas or input of ideas. And when you look at it a bit closer, you zoom in and you ask, okay, but how are the ideas going to come in? Mainly, we hear two responses. One is it will come from customers, and that maybe is the subject group for another webinar, why relying on customers for ideas isn't so useful at times. But even more often you hear that people will say, yes, this box is going to be filled by brainstorming. So actually what we find that there are many methods that although they are not brainstorming, 90% of the method is not brainstorming, the engine or the processor or the core of the method, the part that is supposed to actually generate the ideas, is brainstorming. And if you look at this list we have here, the last bullet point we wrote maybe even ... because we lack the courage, or I lack the courage to say the actual name. But if we think about the new big word, which is design thinking, and if we think within design thinking about the element that has to do with the actual generation of ideas, as far as I can see, that is brainstorming as well. So without taking away from all the other merits that design thinking and other methods have, it's interesting to zoom in and see each of these methods, what is the core that actually is supposed to allow you to generate new and useful ideas. So I think we've been trying to establish that brainstorming doesn't work. And when we say doesn't work, we mean doesn't work as a method for generating new and useful ideas. But actually, I think Drew and I want to say something a bit stronger. We want to say that in addition to just not being useful, brainstorming also is damaging in some ways from the point of view of innovation. So please, Drew.
Okay, and just checking our time, we've got about a little bit less than 20 minutes left. So we're going to move through these last few slides. Again, we encourage you to stay in touch with us either at the end of the webinar or by email, and to share any questions that you have. So as Amna mentioned, not only does brainstorming not work as a method for innovation, but it diverts time and money away from real innovation. It's that opportunity cost that really makes organizations suffer. They lose their faith in the innovation process as a result, and it really distracts and wrecks the credibility a lot of times of what companies are trying to do in innovation.
As you said, it wrecks the credibility, and the reason it wrecks the credibility, very often we talk to people and we hear from them, yeah, innovation, well, it's like blah, blah. Then when you ask them why they think innovation is blah, blah, and that's if they're kind of in a context where they're open their hearts to you, you see that they equate innovation with brainstorming. So all of these flaws that we mentioned before, people don't say to themselves, these are flaws, or some people sometimes don't say to themselves, these are flaws of brainstorming. They say, yeah, that's why we don't need innovation. So people, when you try to do innovation with people, you have to work against the impression that they have, because all they know about innovation or what they equate innovation with is brainstorming.
And I think another serious problem with brainstorming is this. It deludes companies to think that they have plenty of good ideas. I recall working with a large global aerospace company, and in the first meeting with the company in the marketing department, they looked at me and they said, Drew, we have plenty of ideas. That's not our problem. We have all the ideas we need. And I said, well, then what is the problem? And he said, we just don't have any good ideas. And I said to him, well, listen, if you don't have any good ideas, you don't have ideas. But this is what happened, is that they ran brainstorming sessions. They were judging the success by the number of ideas and thinking that they were in a good place as a result of it. And in fact, they weren't. We had to go right back to the beginning and dismiss all those previous ideas from brainstorming sessions to start anew.
And Drew, sorry, I want to interject here because I think this aerospace executive was being very open and sincere and self-conscious, but I've had situations with companies where they say, we have many good ideas, only we can't implement them. And we have a problem with implementation, but the actual ideas are good. And then when you start asking them about the ideas, you find out that they're actually not good ideas if you include in what it means to be a good idea that it should be implementable. I remember one specific case that someone at R&D manager, VP R&D, he said, we have an excellent idea, but we're not implementing it. Why not? Because it's not within the budget. So I said to him, but if it's not within the framework of the budget, it's not considered a good idea. A good idea, and I think that's part of the heritage of brainstorming, that any thought that you're enthusiastic about, you already call it a good idea. If it's not implementable, you say it's just a problem of implementation. While if you think in a more structured way, you understand that part of the definition of being a good idea is that it can be implemented.
Thanks, Amnon. So now we said from the outset that this is a controversial topic. It's probably the most studied and most misunderstood creativity technique out there. There's no question about that. A lot of controversy, and we said from the outset that there are benefits to brainstorming, but just not for the innovation part of your business. So when can brainstorming actually be of use? Well, it's pretty good for just a quick check-in. You know, if you want to get a group of people together and perhaps take something that's being considered an existing idea and get people to weigh in on that idea, it's a good method for that. It's good for team building, which is one of the reasons it continues to be used. Leaders want their teams to be cohesive, and brainstorming delivers that. So it's a nice way to share thoughts between group members and just download some ideas and thoughts that they might have about a particular topic. So let's move to our recommendations. What would we suggest you do going forward? And again, taken in the context that you're talking to two people that have had a lot of experience with this method and variations of it, we just want to share what, if we look back on our careers, what we wish we had done. These are going to be our recommendations to you. Amnon, why don't you start us off?
Okay, so yeah, just complementing what Bruce said, one of my colleagues here said, so are you just going to bash brainstorming, or are you also going to say something useful? So first of all, I think bashing brainstorming is useful, but also let's also recommend something. First of all is be careful. Brainstorming is all around you. It goes by many names. It's hiding maybe even inside some of the methods that we all think we love and cherish. So it doesn't mean that you have to keep away from them, but you just have to ask yourself, or to ask whoever is offering the method, okay, but what is it that's going to help me generate ideas and generate useful ideas?
What can brainstorming deliver, and what can it not deliver? And essentially our recommendation is this. You need to understand what you really need in your team or your organization. If it's just cohesion and fun, some sort of team sharing, team building activity, then brainstorming might be an excellent way to go. But the key is this. You have to set expectations clearly with your leaders. Sometimes the attitude is taken that, well, let's just go ahead and do a brainstorming session. It can't hurt. And you need to stand for now looking at the evidence and marshaling together the argument that says, no, traditional brainstorming for innovation actually can harm us. We can use it for other things, but for innovation, let's keep away.
I think another point is, I actually talked about it before, so I won't go into the details again, but detect the engines. The important thing about the methodology for innovation is what I call the engine. What is it that's supposed to generate the ideas? All the rest is great, it's the wrapping, it's what happens before and after, but the core is what will actually help you generate ideas. And here, we talk about innovation as the ability to think and act differently in a useful way. So when you're trying to study what's the core, what is being offered as the mechanism or the engine that will help you innovate, then you have to ask yourself, will it help me think differently? And thinking differently is a painful thing. So anyone who offers you a mechanism which promises that you will just have fun while you're doing it, be very suspicious about it. And secondly, it has to translate into action. So anyone who offers you a mechanism that doesn't somehow verify that the ideas are implementable, be suspicious of that. And it's a mechanism that has to create thinking that is different. So anything that doesn't show you how it will challenge you to break the way you think, what we call your fixednesses, is also suspicious. And lastly, it has to be useful. So anything that where you feel that the focus is more on enjoying it, on the social aspect of it, on the cohesion, what Drew mentioned before, rather than the actual practical usefulness of it, you should be suspicious of. So maybe to summarize, we're talking about basically due diligence. There are many approaches out there. We've studied a lot of them. Drew studied even more of them. Some of them are probably effective, some are not. Those that rely on brainstorming for idea generation are not useful, at least not for this. So don't give up, shop around until you find the right one for your needs.
So thank you, Amnon. This actually concludes our presentation, this first of a series about the fallacies of innovation. We have some time left. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to encourage you, if you have questions, you can use the window pane in your control panel to type in a question to us. You can also go ahead and email us to the addresses you see there if you would like any of the citations of the research that we shared in this presentation. We're happy to get that for you, and we're happy certainly to entertain any ideas that you have about future webinars and issues that you'd like us to explore in this world of innovation and creativity. Amnon, thank you very much. And we'll sign off at this point. We'll stay on for any questions that you have. Please go ahead and type those in. And if not, you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
I see, Drew, that we have 8 questions already. Great. That we can refer to. And so we'll give people another minute or two to see if they also want to ask questions, and then maybe we can go through some of the questions that we've already received and maybe refer to them.
Very good. All right, Amnon, you want to try one of those questions?
Okay. I'll mention them without the names of the people who asked, but could you please repeat the references to the paper? I think instead of repeating the references, we're going to put this webinar, you'll be able to access it through our website, which is www.sitsite.com. So we'll have the references there, and maybe Drew will even put some more details on the references so it'll be easier for the people.
Very good. I'd be happy to.
There's a question here. Do we have a view on a book called Thinking in New Boxes by Brabender and Innie? I have to admit I don't know about this book. What do you say, Drew?
Yeah, the authors have contacted me, and I'm anxious to get a copy of their book. I think this is an important idea. You know, the box metaphor is another thing that's with us to stay, I think, and thinking outside the box, inside the box, new boxes, etc. So I think what's great about what's happening in the innovation community in general is that people are gravitating now to the more systematic, constrained approaches where you define boundaries. And so it'll be good to read what this research is. I've not read it, though, yet.
I remind you that Drew's book, Drew and Jacob Goldenberg's book about SAT is called Inside the Box, and indeed we kind of fly the flag of inside the box thinking. And our friend Jeff from Pearson once told me, actually what you guys are saying is think inside the box, but from time to time you're allowed to peer out of the side of the box. And actually I think it's important to say that we don't claim that it's never useful to look outside the box. We just claim that the crack in your thinking, the qualitative change, the paradigm shift happens inside the box. And then, of course, it's also very useful to go to other boxes and mix boxes and other stuff you could do with the box metaphor. The next question is, do you think the impact effect of innovation is diluted by constant workshops with the customer? I'll just briefly say, yes, I think it is diluted. I think being in touch with the customer is very good, but again, it depends what you're looking for when you're in touch with the customer. If what you're looking for is new ideas, I think most of the time you're diluting and wasting a lot of the time. If what you want is good relationship with the customers and listening to the customers, that's great. Drew, you have experience with that.
Yeah, you have to certainly guard against what I would call workshop fatigue. You can burn out teams, you can burn out clients. What I think is important is to understand the client's sort of annual business planning process. What is the rhythm of their business? When is it a good time to source the team with new ideas in relation to the business and marketing planning that's going on? You know, at J&J and other companies, I found that there was a lot of interest in doing ideation sessions in the first quarter, you know, say that February, March timeframe, when budgets are well understood and mandates are well understood and market changes have occurred. Then teams like to do stuff at the end of the year too, in that November, December timeframe. Want to give themselves a jump start once the business planning cycle is over, and they source themselves with a lot of great ideas to get the new year off to a great start.
And the next question is, for breakthrough innovation, name two methods that do work. We obviously think ours does. It's a good question. What do you say, Drew?
Well, you know, I've had experience with lateral thinking, with Scamper, with SAT, of course, and different mind mapping tools. And so, you know, I recall getting contacted by a lady that had been trained at Buffalo University in brainstorming and other techniques. And she said, you know, a good creativity person uses many tools. And I like that mentality, right? That it's not just one tool that it's going to get you through everything you need. And I encourage people to have multiple tools and be a good student of creativity. Go back and read the classics. Now, I'm not ducking the question. I will tell you that when it comes to breakthrough ideas, I still am bullish on the SIT method. That's what the book is about. I've just seen it work over and over with companies from a wide variety of industries get to a different place. That's not to say another tool couldn't have done it too. Just for the efficiency of time and money, this is where I would put my bet to get the organization to move forward.
There's a question about if there's a way to download the presentation. Yes, definitely, there is, and through our website you can. We even have a recording of not only the presentation but also the voice, the audio. There's a question: how would you respond to Berkon? ScottBerkun.com is the reference for people who want to look for it. Berkun is B-E-R-K-U-N. Who says bad brainstorming is tainting good brainstorming. And my response is that I'm sure that bad brainstorming is even worse than good brainstorming, but I think what we've been trying to establish here is that there's no such thing as good brainstorming in the context of generating new and useful ideas, because brainstorming by definition is harmful to coming up with good ideas. I know it's a pretty extreme way of phrasing it, but it's just 18 years of trying not to say it, and now that it's out, I'm just saying it as I believe it is. Drew?
No, I follow Scott Berkin's blog. I've read his book, The Myths of Innovation, and I agree with most of it. There's just a couple of fine points that I probably would have a different point of view. But Scott is a dyed-in-the-wool corporate practitioner like me. He spent years in the trenches at Microsoft, and he's a smart guy. He's got great insights to a lot of things. And so, but I think that point he made is definitely right on the money.
The next question is, I've also noticed a problem with brainstorming ideas being captured accurately, and secondly, being voted on appropriately. Can you comment? Meaning problems with capturing and problems with voting. What do you say, Drew?
Well, that comes down to the quality of the facilitator. And there's no doubt about that. But there, and I've seen this mistake, and I've made this mistake. I'm not going to deny it. You know, there's a setting where you're there with your colleagues and somebody shares an idea, but then you write it up on the chart, on the flip chart, that fits more of your vision of the idea, not what the person originally says. And so it's the old rule, right? The person who has the marker has the power, and that's something that a good facilitator can avoid. And how things are voted on. There's a lot of debate around how do you select ideas. And I would tell you that there are very straightforward methods developed through the decision sciences about how to select, how to make decisions between choices. It's not really an innovation question. It's a managerial question on decision making. I would encourage people to look at what tools are available and be systematic and disciplined so that you make sure the good ideas really do float to the top. You want to harness all the great work you've done, but you've got to use the scientific methods to get there.
I agree with you, and in our facilitator, our colleagues, it's also a challenge for us to capture accurately and to vote appropriately. And we've borrowed from others, and we've read and we've studied, and we've also developed our own techniques. But again, I think there's an inherent problem, and I agree with the definition that it's supposed to be non-judgmental. Think about it. When you try to, let's say someone mentions a thought and they try to propose it as an idea, and you try to refine their thought in order to capture it properly, the line between being judgmental and just being precise is very fine. And I believe that, so I would say that although capturing appropriately is a problem for everyone, it's even worse in brainstorming because of the fear of judgment. Another question, sorry, yeah?
Yeah, I just received one by email that I think dovetails very nicely to that point. I realize we're out of time, but if you wish to stay on the webinar, we'll continue to answer some of these questions. Let me ask this question from one of our participants that just emailed me. He says in organizations is still pervasive. You've got silos that inhibit the flow of information. And here's his question. What do you say when a person points out that an idea is flawed for various reasons, funding, technology, resources, etc.? This is considered a negative and not being a team player. So what do you do? I'm going to let you try that one.
Sure. I think it's an excellent question. First of all, I agree that it would be utopian to say we no longer need something to break hierarchies, especially in the corporate world, because hierarchies still exist, and actually they're pretty useful anyway. But I think that the main point, let's say the main inhibitor these days for innovation is not hierarchy, although it's one of the problems. I think it's very important that when someone points out flaws of an idea, that person will be encouraged as well. I think the easy path is to say, when anyone says anything, you have to applaud and you're not allowed to be judgmental. I think it's the easy way out because obviously you're supposedly protecting someone, although I think it's false protection because I don't want to be in a situation. I feel pretty silly in a situation where I know that whatever I say, people will give me a thumbs up because that's the dynamics. Because then I don't have any real feedback on my ideas. I prefer very much a situation where I raise an idea and people who can detect flaws in my idea will put them on the table and will give me a fair chance to maybe defend my idea or say thank you very much for helping me not waste my time and energy on an idea that is flawed. So I think the facilitator's role is not keeping everyone nice. I think the facilitator's role is saying any idea that comes up, if you have detected a flaw in it, please put it on the table. Please do it in a delicate way. Please make sure you don't do it in an offensive way. Sorry. Please make sure that you're looking at flaws in the idea and not in the person who mentioned the idea. And now let's facilitate a good discussion and kind of a negotiation between those who think it can and those who think it cannot. And let's do this negotiation not to try to prove that it's possible or not, but to all of us together try to find how we make it possible. And I think that's the crucial thing. And I think the structured methods, ours for example, and probably others as well, what they do is not there. What the structured methods do is they create a process of negotiation, mental negotiation that finds the way to make ideas possible. I'll go to the next question because we still have a few. Okay, Drew?
Okay.
If you go through a process before a brainstorming session, asking for people's individual inputs and solutions, and then guide the brainstorming session with regard to the subject matter, and then ask each member questions about the feasibility of each suggestion, is that still a brainstorming session or is it something else?
It's a great.
I think. Yeah.
Let me go ahead and answer that because you'll see this idea a lot in the research that a good way to conduct brainstorming is to have people work individually like the control group in a research study, right? Like in the nominal group. And there's a very nice article online now by Dr. Kevin Byron, who I referred to before, who talks about this. And one of the commenters on his blog site brought this very point up. It may even be the person that's on this call. And I like the idea. I think it's a way to take advantage of people's individual work, but I would offer this caveat. Just telling people to come up with ideas on their own first and then asking them to get together as a group is not enough. People still need some structured, systematic way on how they're going to generate ideas. Innovation is a skill. It's not a gift. It's not something you're born with. People have to learn creative methods like they learn any other skill in business or learning a new sport, etc. So just sending people off to think of an idea without giving them the right cognitive tools to come up with ideas is not going far enough, and your organization could still end up short of what it needs for future growth.
And just comment that several years ago, I was invited to facilitate in the BBC in the UK on coming up with ideas for new programs. And in the negotiation before we started working, they wanted to be sure that what we're doing is really different from brainstorming. So what we came up with in the end was they did a one-day brainstorming session with a professional brainstorming facilitator. And our agreement was that they make a list of all the results of the brainstorming session, and we open the list at the beginning of our 2 days, and we're not allowed to come up with any idea that's on the list. So I think brainstorming is a good technique for kind of cleaning the closets, putting on the table everything that's already there in your head. Okay, let's consider that, let's look at it, let's do whatever. And now, after you've kind of downloaded everything that's there in your brain, that's where the real fixing, breaking, paradigm-shifting work starts, and that's where you need the real tools and the structured way to challenge yourself. And the next question is it important for the facilitator of innovation to be a creative person generating ideas himself or herself?
You know, look, it doesn't hurt, but I think the thing is the facilitator has to have both cognitive thinking tools, and it has to be trained in creativity as well as being trained in facilitation, and they're different. We found this out at J&J, where you can be a creative person, well trained in a particular method, but it still helps to have a person in the room that is organizing things and keeping the groups efficient and using the tools appropriately. Because any tool that you use misapplied isn't going to get the results that it needs. And it takes a combination, I think, of both creativity training and methodological training as well as sound facilitation techniques. And a lot of organizations will have groups like Six Sigma, Black Belt groups that are people that have facilitation skills. And they are used to standing up in front of colleagues and managing Six Sigma, lean, innovation, different types of projects. And all they need to do then is layer in a proven, research-based methodology of innovating ideas, creating ideas, to their already sound facilitation skills, and I think it's a winning combination. We're seeing more companies do this.
I think also it's interesting that in SAT versus brainstorming, I think one of the apparently unwritten rules of brainstorming is that the facilitator should be kind of neutral. The facilitator can't suggest ideas or be part of the judging game, of course. And in SAT, actually, facilitators do suggest ideas and they do judge, but all within the structure. And I think it's less important that the facilitator will be a creative person, because we believe that an intelligent person who follows the right structures becomes a creative person. So by dint of following the structures and facilitating the structures, we believe the facilitator can contribute, and of course, keeping everything in proportion. Obviously, the facilitator is in a situation where he or she can take over the discussion, so they have to be careful of that as well. And please elaborate on best practices to prioritize the good ideas. I'm afraid it's a bit out of scope now. Maybe we'll talk about it in another webinar. We have a question. What about the anti-conventional thinking by Jeffrey Paul Baumgartner? Drew, you're the scholar. What do you say? Do you know it? I don't know it, so.
Yeah, I'm aware of those methods that Jeffrey talks about, and I think we alluded to it a little bit before. That here's my general guidelines about when you come across methods from different people, whether they are an academic, consultant, a self-styled, self-declared innovation guru. It doesn't matter. When I was at J&J, I developed a pretty thick skin to this stuff because I'd been burned so many times by these methods, and we just tried so many different ways and came up empty. And so what my simple rule of thumb is this: when somebody says to you that they have an innovation idea or an innovation method, I ask them two simple questions. The first question is, do you know how to innovate? And I think that's a reasonable question for a person who says they're in the innovation space. And if they say yes, the second question is, how? And the burden of proof that I would put on innovation consultants is this: you have to be able to explain it to me on the phone well enough that I could explain it to my next door neighbor tonight over a beer or a glass of wine, and my neighbor would understand it. Because if it's this meta proprietary thing that I can only find out if I do a workshop, forget it. I'm not interested in that. Explain the method, that whether it works or not, how it works, so I can explain it to other people, because I'm a teacher and I put the burden of proof on these methods. What would I teach to my students, and will they get a result? It's novel, new, surprising, and useful. And so that's, rather than comment on that particular method that you commented on, I would ask you to go back with those two questions and see if you get an answer that you're satisfied with.
And we have several additional comments, but actually just one more, which is an actual question, so I think maybe we'll close with that one. The question is, what are your thoughts regarding crowd or community sourcing software platforms for the ideation? And I would kind of generalize that to the open innovation movement in general.
I'll take a stab at that. I'll be honest right up front that I'm not a big fan of open innovation simply because I think it's an old idea with a new name. Open innovation, crowdsourcing is basically license and acquisition. And I spent several years in J&J in the mergers and acquisitions group where we would go out and basically practice what are considered open innovation techniques. Companies have been doing this for years. And the other concern I have about open innovation in general is that there's no such thing as a free lunch. What if somebody's going to offer an idea to you? They're going to want some payment, or they're going to want some royalty. They're going to want something back. And so I'm still keeping an open mind to watch what happens. I'm involved in several groups around crowdsourcing and things like that. But this is nothing new. It's just been repackaged into this format. I think P&G had a big thing to do with that with their Connect and Develop program, which publicly they claim was very successful, but there may be another story that suggests otherwise in terms of long-term results. So you asked the question, and I've got to tell you, I'm just not a big fan of it in the simple sense that it is just license and acquisition.
I'd just like to comment on it. I believe I've had some experience helping companies set up, or working with companies that have set up schemes for that we're reading about. I believe that open innovation, again, it's a good approach to have better connections with the outside world, and in the sense that companies and corporations tended and still tend to be relatively insular and not open enough, I think it's a good message to do. I think the world is a better place when people connect more to other people. But I think we should separate between that and the ability to generate novel and useful thoughts. I think it's an excellent way to improve communication. I don't think it's a method to generate novel and useful thoughts. And I think we're through with the questions. I appreciate very much all those people, dozens of people who are still with us 16 minutes after official time. And I appreciate everyone's patience to be with us. And I think both Drew and I will be very happy to continue the dialogue through email and other communication methods. And for my part here in SIT offices in Tel Aviv, thank you very much. And thanks, Drew, for this joint work together.
Thanks, Amnon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.